So good afternoon. I'd like to introduce Johanne Pelletier, who's coming to bring you a talk. Dr. Pelletier is a quantitative ecologist working on forests and woodlands. Can you hear me back there? No. Hello, can you hear me now? Now? No? Yes. Okay. So, Johanne Pelletier is a quantitative ecologist. She's working on forests and woodlands in the context of global change. She's interested in the role of human activities on woody ecosystems and its link to climate change. So, Dr. Pelletier earned her PhD at McGill University in Canada and with the Smithsonian Tropical Institute in Panama. Currently, she's a TNC NatureNet postdoctoral fellow at the Atkinson Center for Sustainable Future and academically resides in the Department of Applied Economics here at Cornell and is collaborating with the Nature Conservancy. The goal of her research is to improve our understanding of the impacts of human interactions with terrestrial ecosystems through land use and land cover change with the goal of mitigating climate change, sustaining ecosystem services, and improving the livelihoods of forest-dependent people. She conducts her research in the Eastern and Southern Africa region, as well as in Latin America. So let's welcome Johanne Pelletier.
Thank you, Peter. Oh, my issue. Well, good afternoon. I'm really glad to be here with you. Not sure how to. We need. I'm doing feedback. Hello. Testing. 1, 2. Hello. Okay. Can you hear me? Good. Okay, I'm glad to be here with you this afternoon to talk about a fascinating topic for the future of our planet. And I'm going to talk about terrestrial ecosystem. It's linked to climate change. I'm working with Christopher Barrett in applied economics. I'm an ecologist, and I'm interested, as Peter said, to better understand the relationship between people use of the forest and its impact on the ecosystem and the way we can sustain it in the future. So I will start with a little overview of what I'm going to tell you about this afternoon. I'm going to let you know about what is the contribution of land use change in the climate problem. I will talk about historical contribution. I will talk about terrestrial sink and sources. Then I will introduce you to something you may have heard, the forest-based mitigation mechanism that is now in place under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, known as UNFCCC. I will tell you what's new about it and what are the requirements for participating in RED. I will also focus on what are the current challenges to make it work, to actually reduce emissions from deforestation. I'm going to give you an example from Panama, Zambia, and Democratic Republic of Congo, where I have worked. Okay, so let's go see our global carbon cycle. What is very interesting about the terrestrial system, and which is different from other carbon pool or sources, is that it's a big two-way process. So the biosphere absorbs carbon in vegetation, in soil, and it also emits carbon through land use change mostly. And so if you look at the absorption, it plays a big role, and even greater role than ocean. So it's quite important to keep that in mind. So what is land use change? Land use change is when you have land use that is converted to another land use. For example, land that is under forest, that is clear and goes to cropland or grassland. Well, because different land type have different carbon storage potential, land use change may lead to net emissions or to carbon uptake. So that's what's really interesting about this, because as human, we have the control, and we have some control on this system. With we can decide to take action to reduce emission or increase CO2 removal from the terrestrial system, something we cannot do with the ocean, for example. So where is the carbon stored on land? Well, it's stored in soil, but it's also stored in trees that are great carbon reservoir. So if you think about these big tropical trees, they are large, massive. Half of their weight, dry weight, is carbon. So when they are cut down, all the carbon that is stored will be burned or decompose, and it's going to end up in the atmosphere. So if we look at the total global emissions, right now, if for an average of between 2008 and 2017, land use change contribute to about 13% of total global emission. But it is funny because when I started graduate school, land use emission from land use change were 20% of contribution. But since every year we dump just more greenhouse gas emission to the atmosphere, the contribution of land use change is proportionally decreasing. So before it occupied more, it contributed more, but now fossil fuels, since they are even ever increasing, it contributes less, but it's still a very large amount. So land use change has been the dominant source of CO2 emission until 1950. So forests have been cleared in Europe and in North America in the 19th century and before 1950. And now in the tropics, this is the largest source of emission in most countries. For example, in Panama, it's 60% of emission come from land use change. If we look at the historical cumulative emission by source, the total emission from land use change is about 31%, which is for 1870 to 2017, which is equivalent to the contribution of coal. And one thing I like to point out is also the historical cumulative emission by continent. Because I'm going to talk about where deforestation is taking place, and definitely Europe, North America have disproportionately contributed to emissions. If you look at the contribution of South America and Africa, it's very little. It's because the emissions are produced or are very correlated with GDP. It's linked to development. So there's still a lot of development that has to happen in Africa and in South America. But until now, they have had very limited impact on the climate. So what are the major sources? The major source is very much in the tropics. So when we look at the terrestrial system, as I said, it interacts in two ways with the climate. But forests are a sink, so it's a gross sink, and it's also a net sink. So it's important to keep that in mind, that forests are doing this service for us. They are taking carbon of the atmosphere. This is very much in boreal forests, temperate forests, and in intact tropical forests that you have a major sink, but also some sink come from regrowth in tropical forests. If we look at what is the source, it's really located in the tropics, and it comes from deforestation. So this is a major source, and it takes place in the tropics. So the regrowth, the high regrowth that we see in the tropics is often related to shifting cultivation pattern or abandonment after cultivation. So if we look by continent, South America has had the largest source of emission, of carbon emission, that you can see by the upward facing bars, and the downward facing are your sink. So I don't know if I can point, probably not. But so the bars that are green, that's the sink, and the bars that are brown and orange are the sources. So most of the source and sink have come from South America. In Asia, and in Africa, deforestation has been a bit reduced for that time period in South America and in Asia, but it has increased in Africa. So what have people done for the problem with tropical deforestation? Well, in 2005, 2 countries have presented a proposal to the convention, Costa Rica and Papua New Guinea, to create positive incentive for country, positive incentive being money, for country that would want to avoid deforestation. So then with negotiation, other activities have been included. So countries were saying, okay, deforestation is a big problem, but there's also degradation in the forests that come from selective logging. And then countries that had protected their forests were saying, okay, are you just going to incentivize countries that have been bad, that have not protected their forests, and us that have done actually something to protect them, we cannot participate, we cannot receive anything? So then that's when the plus came. So the mechanism is known as REDD+, R-E-D-D plus. And the plus is for the role of conservation, sustainable management of forests, and enhancement of forest carbon stocks. So what's the idea behind REDD? Well, the idea is really to create a mechanism to compensate developing countries for reducing emissions from deforestation, as I said. Things that are very different is that it's, the idea is to kind of scale up a big payment for environmental services. So it's really, we're gonna pay you based on results. So if you perform and succeed at demonstrating, at reducing and demonstrating that you have reduced emission, that's when you will be paid. And so the goal of the mechanism is really to increase the value of standing forests, because people in the tropics, they depend on the land for their livelihood, they depend on the forest. And so often really what happened, and what was a shock for me, is that often the trees are cleared and they are just burned in the field. So it just cut down and burned because the trees and the forest has no value for a farmer. They cannot get anything, they cannot eat out of trees. So they need to cut them to plant something, to have a livelihood. So it's not a small thing, trees are, we can even see on Google Earth images, we can see the logs that are getting burned and the ashes that we can see. So I will take you through the different steps of the negotiation briefly. So there have been different decisions under the convention to actually build the mechanism, define what activities were to be included, and what countries need to do, and what methodology they need to follow, and also how it's going to be surveyed, like how it's going to be all assessed. Because if we want to create a big mechanism where we can prove that emissions have been reduced and country get paid on that basis, there needs to be some robust methodology. So definitely it's really in Warsaw that the main framework for REDD was adopted, and many significant decisions along the way. With the Paris Agreement, Article 5, it also recalled the importance of terrestrial sink, especially forests, and encourage countries that are party to the convention to implement and support a REDD and other activity that can lead to sustainable management of forests. So countries that are interested to participate in REDD have to do different things to get ready. So there has been a readiness phase, and all countries have received support to establish different aspects of a REDD readiness phase. One of them is adopt a REDD national strategy, which is to understand what are the drivers of deforestation and what they're going to do about it. Establish a forest reference emission level, which would tell us, okay, how much they have reduced, build a forest monitoring system to prove that they have reduced, and establish safeguards to show what they have done to protect the people that live from the forest and the land where they are reducing deforestation. So I'm going to come back along the way on that. So now we have seen a little bit of emission from land use change. We have seen that REDD has been created, and that it is an unprecedented level of funding for forests. So right now I'm going to tell you about what countries have to do and what are the criteria so that they can prove that they have reduced emission from deforestation. So one characteristic of emissions from land use change is that they have large associated uncertainties. So this is different characteristic from emission from fossil fuel that we know very well. So this is the uncertainty around emissions from land use change have an impact on how robust and what we will do in REDD to actually be able to prove that the emissions have been reduced. So just a basic information, some background of how we calculate carbon emissions from land use change. Basically, it's simply activity data, which is the forest area change or the area of change in hectare, and the change in carbon stock. So for example, if you convert from forest to cropland, what is the difference in, what is the change in carbon stock? And so for activity data, the information that is necessary as a basic level, it's non-spatial information from census, land census, and inventory. This unfortunately cannot be usable for REDD because for REDD we need traceability. And so we need to know what has happened in a piece of land over time. So the second approach is track the conversion between land use category in 2 points in time. But it's really through the third approach using satellite remote sensing and spatially explicit tracking of land use conversion over time that REDD can really be robust enough at the methodological level. So for activity data, we need remote sensing. For emission factor, usually this comes from vegetation survey, so plots that are established in forests. So here you can see people I've worked with that I have trained to do participatory forest carbon assessment. So you establish random points in your forest that you go and visit, establish plot where you measure the trees, girths, and so the diameter at breast height and height of the trees, and litter, woody debris. So that's how you get a measurement of the condition of the forest. And then you use an allometric model to convert these measurements to biomass. So there are 5 carbon pools that need to be tracked. So you have above ground biomass, below ground biomass, woody debris, litter, and soil carbon. And so when land use change happens, you need to track these 5 pools, and you need to track them into different vegetation. So quickly, the complexity increase, and you need to track it with some modeling approach. So I told you earlier that one of the requirements for participating in RED is to establish a forest reference emission levels. So what is that? It's really a benchmark that will be used to calculate the performance of the country in tackling deforestation and at implementing RED activities. So it must be consistent with other reporting under the convention. And it needs to take into account historical data. So what was the deforestation in the past, and what is the projected deforestation, taking into account national circumstances. For example, if countries have not deforested in the past, they can be allowed to deforest some compared to other countries that have just cut down a lot of their forests. So there needs to be some adjustment depending on the country. And so countries are expected to follow a stepwise approach and submit their forest reference emission level to be technically assessed by the Secretariat. And so some countries have already done it. So let's say the reference emission level is the projection from historic data, but the country also need to be monitoring what's happening with deforestation, and this is done by building a forest monitoring system. So as I said, the key thing to have a forest monitoring system is have the remote sensing capability and ground-based forest carbon inventory. And so with that, they should be able to measure and report on change in forest carbon stocks and in forest area. And this system needs to be transparent, consistent over time, and so that emission can be verified. So as I said before, it's a result-based mechanism, so you need to be able to show your results. So there is definitely challenges for country to assess activity data, especially so forest area change. Many countries, when RED started and their whole discussion, they never had any land use map or forest maps. So for example, I review a submission from Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast, and they had never had land use maps. So they had just an estimate from census from the ground of how much forest they have. So definitely one of the big contribution of RED so far is to really fund and provide countries with funding to improve their monitoring of natural resources. This is also other countries have challenges with emission factors, so ground measurement, especially in countries that have a high soil carbon content. It presents a challenge. So these big peatland forests in Indonesia that lacked proper information. So I will talk to you about Panama as a case study where I worked for my PhD. So as I said, the goal is to provide credible emission reduction from RED, so being able to demonstrate that emissions have been reduced. So something I have done is using a modeling approach to assess emissions from land use change and analyze what's the uncertainty on these estimates. So using sensitivity analysis, I made a diagnosis of uncertainty. In Panama, definitely, mature forest carbon stock is the main source of error. And I will just walk you through what I mean by these different sources of error. So why is it so uncertain, the mature forest carbon density? Well, Panama had many scientists working there for a long time with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. But what we realized looking at data available is that there's no standardized methodology. People will measure this way and this other way and get some very different estimates. And then you have different allometric models that are used to convert tree measurements to biomass that also lead to very different estimates of emissions. So for example, we see here the purple and the green, they were calculated with the same data set, but two different allometric models. So major difference. So in terms of land use map quality, here is a historical map for Panama. And a problem in the tropics is that you have a lot of cloud cover. So in 1 year, for a location, you can have no image available. Like right now, different satellite missions have been launched. So there's more options for countries. But when RED started and like until more recently, in the last 5 years, where we had like more boom, countries were limited, definitely. And so you see one map for Panama, and it's made from images from 4 different years. So definitely this doesn't give you a good view of what was your land use at that time. And when you want to assess what's the change, you run into some problem for estimating. There's also the land use dynamics. So after deforestation, what happens with your land? Is it going to under regrowth? Is it going to stay in agriculture? So this uncertainty in terms of the carbon dynamics after land is converted is also a major source of error. In one other work that I did, I test different modeling approach to calculate emissions with the same data. And it's also a major source of error. So that makes it difficult to compare emissions between countries, because if you use different model A and model B, you can get very different emission estimates. And so propagating the error over the model, this is what I should not do. Propagating the error on the model using a Monte Carlo approach and comparing different scenarios of emission reduction, I was able to see that definitely, unless Panama succeeds reducing deforestation by 50%, we will not actually be sure that emissions have been reduced in Panama given the uncertainty around the estimates. So this really called for countries to invest effort and time in setting up their forest monitoring system. So why does it matter? It's because larger uncertainty in carbon stock will have an impact on emissions reductions. So it will affect emission reduction. And this has a financial implication because you want to sell them. And so if there's too much uncertainty, it doesn't have the same value as something that's more certain. And also in the whole mechanism, countries have advantage to overestimate their emissions. And so they get more emission reduction. So it's important to create a robust system to surround this, to be able to actually make sure that countries participating can prove robustly that they have reduced their emissions. So these are the list of countries that have submitted proposed forest reference emission level to the Secretariat. So there are 39. And right now they are being analyzed. So country might get comments and have to do revision to make sure that there is transparency in their methods and in the assumptions that they have. And so right now, most countries assess deforestation, but for forest degradation, there's still not necessarily proven methods. It's like really, it has been developing very much recently, but a lot of countries have not included forest degradation. So there has been recent progress and important progress to assess, in terms of remote sensing, to assess change in carbon density. I sent you the paper that is one of the progress, but it's still contested about the accuracy and usability by countries. So we will follow up on that. So now we've seen that countries are required to build a robust system to prove that they have reduced deforestation. But one of the core aspects is really to understand the cause of deforestation and at the end of it, reduce deforestation. There's no point to have a system if you don't manage to reduce deforestation after all. So it's important to understand what are the complex forces that drive deforestation if you want to be able to make policy to reduce it. So researchers make a difference between proximate drivers of deforestation, so the actual activities that cause deforestation, agricultural expansion, wood extraction, or settlement, urban area expansion. But you know, these activities are not necessarily legal or illegal, and they are not conducted by, they are conducted by different agents. So you can have the shifting cultivation farmer, or you can have the big business that want to produce palm oil. So it's really important to understand the underlying drivers. So these underlying drivers are the most important and complex to address, and they are really key and responsible in 80% of the cases for deforestation. So it's really what the indirect land use change are the ones that are related to policy or markets, and that show that it's more than just the land user decision. There's a whole system around it that promote deforestation. So it's structural. So addressing deforestation is difficult because the need for food and wood persists. And so we need to find ways to increase food production and in other ways. So one very discouraging study that came out recently showed that even despite hundreds of commitments by companies to remove along their supply chains to get to the zero deforestation supply chain, the reduction of deforestation in Brazil has been actually offset by increases in Southeast Asia, so in Indonesia. So apparently they would not, deforestation at the end of it has not slowed down. So this is bad news. So I will give you an example for Zambia, where most of my research activities are focused right now. So Zambia is a landlocked country in the Southern Africa region. It has the largest forest estate in the whole region, mostly Nyambo woodland. And Zambia has been one of the pilot projects of UN RED activities. So they have received funding to establish their national forest strategy. And so in part of that, they have made a literature review on drivers of deforestation. In the review, many claim that the charcoal production is a big problem in Zambia, and it is one of the top drivers of deforestation. So because of that, in their objective, strategic objective, they have two objectives that focus on energy. One is to regulate wood, fuel, and charcoal production, charcoal and firewood, and to adopt widely alternative energy sources in 2 years. Yeah, so, and in terms of agriculture, well, there is some vague objective about by 2030, have good agricultural practice that mitigate carbon emissions. But when one of the aspects that is important to understand is to make a policy that will work and succeed at abating deforestation is to really understand what's happening on the ground with strong quantitative data. And it's one of the objectives of my research in Zambia. So right now, the problem is pointed at to wood energy. But in the tropics, in Zambia, as in other places, agriculture is usually the main driver. So as I said before, wood can be burned, or people can make charcoal out of it. So if they make charcoal out of it, there's no additional emission that would have been produced from conversion to, from agriculture. And right now in Zambia, the extent of deforestation for agriculture could provide charcoal multiple times to provide energy multiple times for the country in terms of charcoal. So definitely it's important to disentangle, is the forest cleared for agriculture or for energy? So for example, I'm showing you here some case study, a case study area where it's on customary land. So the production of charcoal is trees are cut, they are put in a pile and then covered with about a feet of soil, and then fire is set inside underground, in fact, and it's that's how charcoal is formed with pyrolysis with limited oxygen. But definitely these people, they were producers, and they were just coming on the land of a farmer that wanted to expand land for agriculture. So these guys, they come, they make charcoal, and it's a benefit for the landowner, because then they clear and the land is free of trees for farming. So past summer, and I'm still coming back soon to the field to work in this charcoal production hotspot, to be able to disentangle what are the drivers of charcoal production. So we measure what's the impact on biomass and species, and we also do survey to producer to see if it's for farming or it's for energy. So one important component is also validation and really building a monitoring system to understand where deforestation is going. So using remote sensing imagery is much easier to be able to track what happens with one piece of land. So we were in the field in July 2018. So the little red circle are area that were active charcoal kiln where we worked. So if we look 1 year before our field work, we see that forest was there. And then when we were there, it was cleared, and it's mostly for agriculture. So the land, they become part of other fields that are expanding. So one other characteristic that's important in the tropics is that land is owned by the government. Often, most of the land, especially in Africa, this is the case. The owner of the land is the state, and the state is also managing a lot of land. So for example, this is Zambia. About 30% of Zambia is, Zambia's forest is managed by the government. But unfortunately, there's a lack of resource and personnel. So it means that in reality, these forests are just open for use. So it's an open resource, and people go and make charcoal. So we went in forest reserve to work on active kilns, and definitely people were there producing charcoal, and people that at forestry department that were supposed to patrol and emit permits or enforce, well, they had no vehicle, no motor vehicle, no motorbike, no car to go there. And it's a big area. So how can you enforce anything if you don't have a car, you don't have a way of transportation? So definitely one way that forests will be governed better, and I think like definitely there's a process of decentralization, but it's very slow, is to actually go along with claims. And there's indigenous people and communities that want to have the management of their land. So definitely they could do a better job than governments that are far away or have limited resources. So in terms of governance, there has been some progress to give land to other stakeholders that have been claiming it, but this process should go on to improve the governance. So last challenge is related to social risks that come with REDD. So definitely one key aspect that countries have to build when they are when they want to participate in REDD is to create a system of information on safeguards. So it's not just the benefit in terms of carbon, it's also about benefit of people and avoiding doing harm. So forests are very important for livelihood. It's estimated that between 1 and 2 billion people depend on forests for their livelihood. Being in terms of land, of wood for cooking, of products they get for their houses, and definitely where I work, people highly depend on forests. It's very important. And so REDD by coming, I mean, definitely since it becomes, these lands are legally owned by the government, but in practice, in many areas, they are managed traditionally by people. They have established a set of rules, of customary system to manage their forest. So one big question is like, when REDD project comes, who should benefit? So there has been big social concern about REDD. There has been strong opposition to the mechanism. Indigenous organizations from Central and South America have opposed it. Indigenous groups are rejecting it completely. They don't want to participate. Why? Well, it's because they see it as, you know, some indigenous people have fought a lot to have their territory recognized and their rights recognized. And REDD is like, okay, you're coming to undermine our decision-making autonomy or put restriction on us. So it's not something that they see as welcome, because definitely these people have often protected their forest from cattle ranchers, from commercial producers. that were close or part of the government that now is coming to tell them to not cut their forest. So because of recognizing that, there has been social safeguards that have been adopted in the Cancun Agreement for REDD. So these safeguards, they say, okay, people need to fully participate in the process. Their rights need to be respected, and there needs to be also benefit for them in terms of co-benefit, social benefit, sustainable development. So definitely, like, REDD is not a development project. The goal is to mitigate climate change. So when they arrive in countries, there's different objectives. So and between different objectives, there's definitely trade-offs that arise. So these trade-offs are known as the 3E. So there's the effectiveness at reducing emissions, so environmental goal. Then reducing this emission at the lowest cost possible, which is an economic goal, but also equity that should not be left aside from those that receive benefits and those that bear the costs. So in payment for environmental services and in REDD, there's been different dimension of the concept of equity. Definitely one aspect is the contextual equity, so the prevailing condition or ecological context in which people live and live their life and function. There's also when a project arrives, the being REDD or being payment for environmental services, and they ask people to participate, there's definitely a process, equity of the process. So in terms of procedure, have people been consulted, or is it a legitimate political process that led to the decision making? And then in terms of the project outcome, are they fair? How the benefit and costs are distributed among stakeholders? So I worked in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, in a REDD pilot project to look at equity and benefit sharing. So DRC owns the majority of forests of the Congo Basin, the big country. Forests are owned by the state, but they recognize customary system that people have to manage forests. And so DRC has managed to advance several steps in getting ready for REDD, but definitely there is low governability in the country generally. It's categorized as a fragile state. Benefit sharing, how like people receive benefit or bear the cost of REDD is a problem. So I looked at contextual equity, looking at ecological condition using participatory mapping and remote sensing, and the social condition using household survey and multivariate statistics. We did participatory mapping, household survey in that community. People were really engaged. It was fun, actually. People are really great. So people were trained, they collected GPS points by themselves. We had also people do the household survey with us. And so this is the participatory map and the border that you see. So we're able to use very high remote sensing imagery to track deforestation and land use change, and look at how, and with household survey, see how land is distributed, what are the practice, what are people's livelihood in the village. So we identify major factor of social differentiation. So definitely this factor of in the context is definitely in terms of customary rights to land, even if like the state is the legal owner. There's right holders that in the customary system, they own the land. And so if they own land, like customary land rights, they usually have a more diversified livelihood, have higher economic status, higher level of education, and they also clear more land. So they are the one deforesting. So those that don't have land, they have to rent land to these right holders. In terms of gender, there's social differentiation. Women, head of household, clear less land, and they depend more on agriculture of staple crops than other activities. And so it makes them more susceptible to restriction on being able to cultivate. And so other ethnic group, they are Bantu population and Pygmy population, or Batwa. And those people in the village were very poor, and they depend very much on hunting, gathering, livelihood strategy. So this is like what we found in terms of social context. And so we asked questions based on different rationale, who should benefit from the project. So if we think that actors that have legal rights should benefit, then it's about just 1/3 of the villagers or 1/3 of households that could benefit, so only the right holders. If we think that benefits should go to actors that achieve emission reduction and remove all, again, the right holder are the people that clear the most, or that have land to plant trees, or that could participate to carbon stock enhancement. If we think that low emitting forest stewards should receive the benefits, then it should probably be distributed equally. But there would be no environmental benefit, because then you don't have incentive for people that deforest less. So it's tricky. There are trade-offs. So actors incurring costs could be compensated. So this would need a really careful analysis of what the type of costs should be compensated. And if you think or have the rationale that poor and vulnerable people should receive the compensation or benefit, definitely that's the only one that would address equity issue for the majority. But then these evaluations are difficult to make. They are based on values. And definitely the context in terms of equity will affect the outcome that people can get. And at the end of it, to reduce deforestation, we need a change in behavior. So if people are not satisfied, they will just, or they cannot make a livelihood, they will just keep clearing. That's normal. So in conclusion, I want to emphasize that reducing deforestation and emissions from deforestation is really a pillar of climate change mitigation. I have outlined 3 main challenges with reducing deforestation in the tropics. There's technical challenges that are being resolved through science improvement and that are going on right now. And there's also governance or drivers challenge. This is difficult. It means that government needs to be able to make policies that works. And there's social risk. So definitely it needs to be taken into account for reducing deforestation. But of course, I think there's room for benefit if there's alternative livelihood opportunities for people. So I think right now, red mechanism has stopped a little bit. The main break is because of global financing. And we're waiting, countries are waiting for the money, but at the same time, it's still happening in countries. For example, in Zambia, just got a $40 million project for launching red emissions or landscape approach in the eastern province, so reducing deforestation, forest degradation, sustainable agriculture, and so we don't hear it that much in the news, but it's definitely happening on the ground in countries. And so we need to hope that we can make the right decision, because tropical forests are important for many reasons, for people, biodiversity, for the climate, and for other ecosystem services. Thank you very much.
We have some time for questions.
Not so much. No.
Earlier in our class, we talked about our other types of reference levels. So, what are some of the factors that go into checking out?
Yes, well, definitely you will include land use change maps. You will include what comes from your ground vegetation survey, so your estimates of carbon stock in different land uses. So definitely you can use different type of models. Some can be just a simple projection of your historical in deforestation, so in terms of activity data. And yeah, so countries are really motivated to use national data that they collect themselves, and that's what they want to do too. So it's nationally generated data on change in land use and in change in carbon stocks. So there's other factors that I was talking about under the national circumstances. So countries can for example, make the point if their deforestation has been very low, and say that there is a need of land for development. We can build a case that they should be allowed a bit more deforestation than other countries.
Could you stand up and yell? The microphone's not working.
So I was wondering if some of the developing countries try to mess with the system or try to produce fake numbers to show Brad they changed their emissions to get the money, and how would the UN combat this?
Yeah, well, I think that I think it's an interesting question. I say, like, definitely. I mean, in a way, it's because if you, like, as I said, there's a technical assessment by the Secretariat that would look at how things were calculated. But definitely in a system where you're selling emission reduction, everybody has advantage to overestimate emission and emission reductions. So at some point, there has to be someone that's able to say, okay, you know, this approach is not valid, but you need a very deep knowledge of what's happening. And so it's difficult. It's difficult. But yeah, sometimes also, I think it's not necessarily willingly, you know, it's just that sometimes countries really face big challenges in having robust data. And they just have to make decision, is it this or that or what? They have to make decisions.
So I used to work in Ecuador, and my experience with Red Plus is that the payments that they make to smallholder farmers are not at all, they're really small, and in comparison to what a conversion to a land use change to an agricultural system could contribute towards their livelihood, Red Plus does not compare at all. So could you talk a little bit about how Red Plus is thinking about addressing those conflicts? Are they thinking about paying for potentially agroforestry systems or other sort of land use changes that contribute to livelihoods but allow for production of that land as well?
Yeah, it's a very good. Yeah. So the question is based on our experience in Ecuador. Farmers or people that get payment from RED are not compensated at the value that they would receive if they would clear or use the land. Well, definitely in a context when the goal is to change behavior, if you're not able to meet the opportunity cost, you face a situation where people will want to use the land, and so it's not providing adequate alternative. So I think in Ecuador it's like socio-bosque program. So it's they just receive a fixed amount for the amount of forest, and it doesn't $20 per hectare, and it's not enough to compensate. But look at it in this way. I think the way it was created is to actually put a value on standing forests, which didn't exist before. The problem is when you are adding restriction to people, okay, and that's happening, and that's an issue, and in the long term it's going to affect the sustainability of the mechanism. Is that if you ask people, I'm going to give you $20 to keep this land, but then you need to not cut it and not have other alternatives. Like people want to live, they want to eat, they want to send their kids to school, they want to buy shoes, simple things like this. So, you know, in this context, yeah, definitely. I mean, it threatens the sustainability.
So has Red Plus thought of any alternatives of potentially supporting like an agroforestry system or something like that that could have ecosystem services provided, but also have an economic?
Yeah, well, all countries, they make different strategies to address deforestation. In the Ecuadorian context, often people have more than 1 hectare of land. They have like large forest estate that they could manage in common. So some in their context that can work possibly. It needs to be evaluated by the government, but in other contexts it's quite different. So instead of directly compensating, they will provide alternative livelihood So you can see everything. Yes, thank you for your question.
Our global population is growing, and as it does, we'll need more space for food.
Yeah.
And especially as developing countries demand more meat, which they are. We'll need even more land. What does Red have to say about that? Like, I was growing food, man.
So very interesting question. Definitely, I don't have the answer. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge. We need to produce more with less. There's debates about land sparing, land sharing. Can we produce in land that would maintain more carbon stocks? So in like agroforestry or intercrop system, so that would contain more carbon, or you actually try to make very intensive system and produce much more in one patch of land. So we need to test this approach. One of the research project I'm doing now with Chris Barrett is to look at Zambia has had an agricultural subsidy, like fertilizer improved seed program, and we want to look, okay, has it had a positive impact or negative impact on forest cover loss? So we want to see, okay, is it a good way to go? But deforestation is so complex, and in many cases, it's like you can get different results. So definitely governments need to really think this through to make something that will work, and they are the best to do it because they know the system and they know its failures. So there's definitely things that work. So it's just there. Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Dr. Pelletier again.